right? And that's why I think, I don't necessarily believe the Yudkowskian scenario that it, converts the Earth into nanobots. I don't know what it does, but I think something, something that is this general and this powerful. No, of course it isn't safe.
All right, yeah, might as well just kick it off. So we are joined by the Schlumberger Centennial Chair of Computer Science at the University of Texas at Austin and the director of its Quantum Information Center, Scott Aaronson. So Scott, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So you are known for your work, especially in quantum computing and computational complexity theory. But I think today we're actually going to focus mostly on AI and see if we can litigate what we expect to be some disagreements with us, because we think that might be more fun.
Okay.
My past self probably won't forgive me for making that move, because my research career was actually started doing, tackling various esoteric problems in computational complexity theory. That was my first couple of papers in undergrad. So my past self will be very angry with me for not wanting to talk about that with you.
Well, look, everyone's talking about AI these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't matter where we started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to hop on the bandwagon. Otherwise, we'll lose all our listeners. But briefly, before we get to AI, I wanted to talk just a bit about your background and investigating some of your ideas about school and education, because you are rather unique, or you have a rather unique background on that front. You were one of these sort of famously precocious kids that everyone likes to tell stories about. You taught yourself calculus at the age of 11, went to college at 15, I believe, and had your PhD by 22 or something.
Well, I wasn't famous at the time, no. but yes, I did do those things. Yes. And no, and it did give me a perspective on education, on what we do right and wrong, and I'm now thinking about that again in the context of my own kids. Right. I am a huge fan of education systems that let students go at their own pace, in each topic. Right. I think that we mostly succeed at that in universities. Right. I will get a freshman or sophomore sometimes wanting to take a graduate course. Right. And my only question as a professor will be, are they prepared for it? Right. Are they going to, it's not, are they qualified on, according to some piece of paper? It's, are they actually qualified? If I talk to them for, 2 minutes, can I see that they are ready to benefit from this course? And I think that is, by and large, not a philosophy that you will find in the, K-12 education system, in certainly in the United States. And in fact, when there are little pockets of, letting kids, go faster, letting kids accelerate, letting kids learn more advanced math and science, like that is being fought against. That is being dismantled in many places for, ostensibly for reasons of equity. But it's very strange that we don't apply that to sports. We don't apply that to music. Right there, it is obvious to everyone that, people who have an inclination or a talent should be able to go as far as it will carry them. It is really like specifically in academic subjects, especially in math and science, that we have this idea. No, everyone of the same age has to be kept at the same level.
So would you want to modify K-12?
Oh, absolutely.
In different ways, such that like people can study whatever they want.
I think having graduation requirements is good. It's good to actually test what people know. It's good to make sure that everyone learns how to read and write and do basic arithmetic and all of those things. But I think there is no point in, sort of keeping people in a class where they already know all the material. There's conversely no point in keeping people in a class where they are struggling, and not understanding anything when, they could do better by going at a slower pace. Now a lot of people would say, oh, that's okay in principle, but, we don't have the money to individualize education, right? I think, we certainly have the ability to have different tracks to move people, up and down, to, let people, skip grades, to group by, interest and ability rather than by age. I think, when we've, seen that done, it's been very successful. The issue is just that, like, for ideological reasons, it's not allowed to be done in many places. But, there is sort of a deeper issue here, right? This is kind of one symptom of I would say a much deeper issue, right? Of like, what is the purpose of school at all, right? Is it to actually learn, to, engage with the external world, or is it to, just learn, to obey what the teacher wants? My daughter, had a science teacher who, marked her down for saying that the electron has a mass, right? Or, because she said, you must have looked that up online, which is, invalid. You were to use the assigned readings only. And according to the readings, the electron is massless. Okay. It is imperative that you only, use the reading, right? So, like when you see that, you realize like there is now nothing, okay, if she's going to learn something in this class, it's not going to be about science. Right. It's, you like from this little thing, you get a window into the entire worldview of this person, right? That, actually, reality does not matter at all, right? What matters is what is on my worksheet, and I had seen that so many times, when I was a student, right? That, like immediately when you encounter it, you sort of recognize the whole philosophy.
And so would you like to see way more people going to university early?
I would certainly like to see more people, starting to get involved in, learning, university level material, at, 14, at 15, when I think many are ready for it. I mean, so certainly it would have made things easier for me if, it was less unusual what I did, right? And it's not unique. There are, other people who have accelerated, even much more than I have. I just, because of some unusual circumstances that involve moving around between the U.S. and Hong Kong, I was able to skip 3 grades. Right? Other people, were even homeschooled, were able to start college when they were 12 or 13. I think that if you let people go according to, ability and interest, I think that would be a lot more common.
Just a small question about that. So if you were able to skip 3 grades, is that because your parents made special requests to the school? Like, I'm wondering how much of it is that like parents don't know that this is possible compared to the school not letting them do it,
My parents really, didn't know that it was possible, except that, when I was in 8th grade in Hong Kong, so I had always been more advanced in math, right? I had always been allowed to, and I went to a private school, actually a Hebrew day school, mostly because, it would, it was the one place that would let me accelerate in math. And then, when we moved to Hong Kong for a little bit, then it turned out that the only way for me to do more advanced math was to just skip a grade entirely. And, my parents were worried about that, that this could make things difficult for me socially. I wanted to do it. Because, at that point, I knew that I wanted to, I felt, like immense, nervousness about, if I'm going to do anything in science, then, it may, so many scientists, do their best work when they're in their 20s. or, when they're very young, right? Every year that I spend wasted is a year that I have lost. And, and I wanted to get to doing interesting research, as soon as I possibly could. And, as for, the claim that it would be difficult socially. Yes, absolutely it was. No question about that. On the other hand, things were already difficult for me socially before I skipped grades. So,
yeah.
So it's very hard to know the counterfactual.
Yeah.
And, so I did things in a strange order. I learned to drive a car and date and sort of be somewhat socially normal, after I had finished my PhD.
So you made reference to this thesis that a lot of school is sort of signaling or, showing employers who can conform to instructions and stuff. This is perhaps most famously associated with Bryan Caplan, who wrote a whole book about this. Does this depress you at all as someone who's at a university teaching students? Do you find that your undergraduate classes are like this in many ways? So
I know Bryan Caplan very well. I've read, his very provocative books, including that one. I've talked about it with him. I mean, look, I feel like, I'm actually teaching things. And the students in my classes are largely there because they actually want to learn, and I think that they are learning some things. So in terms of my personal little corner of things, I feel like things are things pretty much work like they're supposed to. I think
even at the undergrad level.
I teach both undergrad and grad classes. Now, I'm very lucky that I've been allowed so far at UT Austin to just teach the undergrad quantum computing course. I'll actually be teaching it later today. Right. And students are mostly not taking that course, except because they really want to understand quantum computing. Right. So, they're at different levels, but I would say, the level of interest is high. Now, it is absolutely true that I think, a lot of what happens, especially in required classes, classes that students have to take to get a degree, but they don't understand why they're taking it. They don't want to be taking it. Right. I think there you do see a huge amount of just memorizing stuff for the test, forgetting it immediately afterward, just trying to signal your conscientiousness and conformity. And you have, this sort of cargo cult education going on, this sort of, external form of learning, but without real learning taking place. And, it's a very hard problem, because, you could say, well, why don't we just get rid of school and just let everyone, study on their own, all the, to a first approximation, all of human knowledge is now easily accessible, via the internet. You can learn whatever you want. You can even have AI explain to you, whatever is too confusing. The big problem is motivation, right? When I think back to, my own college education, right? Like, once I finally did get to college and was able to start taking advanced math classes, right? Then, suddenly, there are just these grueling problem sets, right? I'm just staying up all night, when I'm 16 or 17, just learning how to prove, theorems about linear algebra or real analysis or topology or, algorithms and complexity theory. And, some of it I enjoyed. Some of it at the time was really grueling, right? But even the grueling stuff, like, I am glad that someone forced me to do it. I am glad that I was in this social environment where, because of my peers, because of my professor, it was expected that I would have to buckle down and do this. right? Because that is what gave me the skills that I was then able to use.
Yeah.
And so I think, there is this element in education of trying to, sort of tie yourself to the mast, as it were, constrain your future self, right? To learn something, right? That you sign up for a course, and then, it's going to be grueling, but you do it anyway. And, I think, it is only rare people who are able to really learn deeply, without that kind of scaffolding. I admire that when I see it, but I think, a lot of people really need it. Now, there's a broader issue here, right? Which is like, are too many people going to college, right? Like, so you could say, that like a lot of the, the sort of fake aspect, comes about because, we got this idea that, just about everyone should be going to college. College is the pathway to a middle class life, right? And then, you get people, there who are sort of not intellectually interested, right? Who actually would probably be doing better, would be learning more if they were out in the real world, if they were running a business, if they were learning a trade, right? But because of these signaling reasons, sometimes because of occupational licensing reasons, they have to be in college, right? And that, I think, is not a good system. I would love for the people who don't want to be in college to be able to just get out into the real world and do what they want to be doing faster.
Interesting. So just on that, so to kind of start bridging over to the AI discussion, I'm curious how ChatGPT has been affecting your teaching, your classrooms. Like, what do you see as a teacher, and the effect of ChatGPT on your students?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I'm in a little bubble where, we've been a little bit insulated from the AI tsunami in education, right? I mean, first of all, I teach, theoretical classes, right? They're about, sort of, learning the mathematical framework of quantum mechanics, learning to prove theorems about quantum computation, things like that. Now, we have always had, an in-class midterm and an in-class final exam, as well as homework that the students turn in, right? I think, the one thing that I've changed in the GPT era is that, I put a little bit more emphasis on the in-class exams. Right? I mean, but I had always assumed, even long before LLMs, that yes, students are going to collaborate on the homework. They're going to look things up online. If they want to do the homework while avoiding learning anything, then that is possible. Right. Then, they have many ways to do that. AI, of course, makes that even easier than it was before. But so basically, we say, look, here's the purpose of the homework. You are welcome to, look things up on the internet, to, talk about it with other students, to use AI now. But, we strongly urge you to actually, understand the solutions that you are turning in. And, of course, if you don't understand them, then that's going to be revealed in the exam. So, with that's like the simplest and lowest tech solution to this issue, right? With graduate classes, it's a little different. Graduate classes, I don't have exams. I do have projects, right? And I think, so every student does a reading and or, original research project. And, I've been playing around with GPT-5 thinking in the last couple of months. I think that even it is not quite yet at the point where it could do these projects.
Interesting.
One interesting thing is like as long as there is anything for humans to do, like as long as there's anything that really, requires humans and it can't be replaced by current AI, then I feel like we can make a very good case for teaching students everything, for teaching them the whole range of knowledge, right? For example, it is clear that we still need to teach kids arithmetic, even though calculators can do it, even though they can they can now put even word problems and algebra problems into Google or into an AI, and it will do it for them. But nevertheless, if the students don't understand it, then how on earth would we build the next level, and then the level after that, and so forth, until finally they can do the things that AI can't do. Similarly, with all the other things where AI has made such impressive progress. Right. If and when we get to a point when AI can just do all economically useful work, or, when it can do all, intellectual labor better than we do it, well, then that really is a different world. And then, that really does, raise profound questions about, why are we educating people? As long as humans are still needed for anything, then probably we still need to teach, this whole range of things. Maybe we'll put less emphasis on arithmetic, on low-level coding, on things on technique of things that people will be relying on AI for. But conceptually, people will still need to understand those things, right? Once humans just become utterly superfluous, well, then I hope that goes well for us.
Yeah, so let's get into that. So I thought maybe a good way to set this up is just to maybe say a little bit about our background. We were talking a bit before we started, but just for the audience and kind of where we're coming from. And so both Ben and I are AI researchers. So I finished my PhD in machine learning a couple of years ago, and I'm now doing industry stuff. Ben is much more on the theoretical, foundational side of things. And one of the things that we talk about in this pod a lot is that there's a big split within the AI research community, where one lobe of it is, say, represented by Jeff Hinton, and are quite worried about the prospect of AI takeover, let's say. And then there's the other half, which I would argue are not really as represented in the podcast world. Don't have as much public outreach, with the exception, of course, of Gary Marcus. But there's names like Michael Jordan, there's Melanie Mitchell, there's Ben Recht. So these profs who spend a good amount of time just teaching. And that's kind of where we're coming from. And so I thought it'd just be fun to get into the disagreement here by talking about something you had said on the Win-Win podcast with Liv Bowery. I think this was about 10 months ago, so your thoughts may have changed. So I just want to say that for the audience. But in that conversation and on your blog, you critique the religion of justa-ism, which says that AI is just a next token predictor or just a stochastic parrot. So I'll only speak for myself here, but as a proud member of the religion of justa-ism, I'm ready and willing to defend my faith, and would love to kind of to go back and forth a little bit.
All right. Well, I would say what are you, Justa? I mean, are you just a collection of neurons that are just, firing according to some, each one according to some very simple underlying rules, right? I mean, I can use, this utterly reductionistic language about you also, right? It seems like a double standard to only use it for the AI.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, I think of AI as just an incredibly powerful tool that has allowed us to amplify human creativity and human productivity. So when I say it's justa, I guess by that I mean is that I don't see any path for it to start having a will to power, having thoughts of its own, and starting to get away from us. But perhaps you do, and so I'd love to maybe get into it a little bit by seeing how you think we could arrive there.
For you, this is not an issue about AI in principle. This is merely an issue about AIs the way that we currently train them and produce them, or is it a broader thing than that?
Yeah, so you're obviously familiar with David Deutsch, and so Deutsch and Popper are big influences, at least on me. And so I'd say in principle, all we know is that it's possible to arrange atoms in such a way that we get human level intelligence. So in principle, we can absolutely create human level
Right.
intelligence.
If we believe in the Church-Turing thesis,
Yeah.
or the sometimes called the Church-Turing Deutsch thesis, since you brought him in, then it ought to be then the fact that it's possible to do it with atoms means that it should also be possible to do it in a computer.
100%. Yeah. So that I agree with. Yes.
Okay. Good. So you agree with that, but your objection is specifically to the approach of building AI by training say a neural net on the whole of human knowledge on tasks like predicting the next token and things like that. Okay, so I would say that it is true that when you just do pre-training of one of these models, right, you get one that seems to have this a lot of raw. I would say intelligence. I would say at least knowledge about the world, but it is not. Does not seem particularly agentic, right? It's not pointed in a particular direction. To the extent that it has a goal, the goal is just to predict the next token, or whatever loss function it was trained on. Okay. However, we all know that by now that's not the end of the story, right? You then can take this base model and you can point it in some direction. Okay, that's exactly what's done with RLHF. With reinforcement learning, where you say, I want to see more like this, I want to see less like that. It's what's done with, actually just giving the AIs explicit instructions, like Asimov's laws of robotics almost. But, this is now like literally done when, Anthropic and OpenAI and these people, write super prompts, or, write they're sort of instructions that for their AI. And it's also what we do with chain of thought reasoning, right? Where we say, you have this goal, right? You are now you are now going to be given all these affordances, beyond just printing tokens, right? You're going to be given, scratch paper that you can write on, right? That the user won't necessarily see. You can go through steps, correct yourself when you're not right, but we are going to, judge the final answer. Right. And so, you now have models that certainly are acting as if they have goals. Right. And this is not a conceptual point anymore. This is actual reality now. Right. You have models that are writing code, that are actually on the internet, have been released onto the internet, that are looking for ways to make money, to accumulate Bitcoin, that have had some success in doing that. So I would say, maybe there is some deep principle that says that making these models more agentic, pointing them toward, goals to achieve, maybe that only goes so far and no further. But if so, then we do not know what that principle is.
Oh, but that's so interesting because on your blog you talk about what you call the Aaronson thesis, right? And so I'll just say this for the audience. So given any game or contest with suitably objective rules, which wasn't specifically constructed to differentiate humans from machines, and on which AI can be given suitably many examples of play, it's only a matter of years before not merely any AI, but any AI on the current paradigm, ! Matches or beats the best human performance. And so I just want to comment on this before you go on, which is that in this, I thought this was so fascinating because you are clearly highlighting all of the limitations of the current system. So you're saying, for example, that so maybe a different way to say it is the process of scientific discovery and research is not a game with suitably objective rules for which you can generate many different examples of play. Also, by adding the caveat that matches or beats the best human performance. So one example that I was going to use was like predicting the stock market. But your return to that would be, well, I've given myself an out by saying match human performance, and human performance is kind of crap there. So the AI is going to potentially match human performance. So you're kind of narrowing the scope of what AI is able to do so significantly in this challenge by adding all these
I was just saying
caveats.
that's a lower bound. That's not necessarily an upper bound on what, I'm saying certainly, yes. Anything, where we have an objective test like that, where we have lots of training examples, it seems pretty hopeless that, to maintain human supremacy over AI, indefinitely into the future, and that's certainly a huge deal for me personally and for my colleagues, because, mathematical research, or a large part of it, is an example of that, right? It is something where we know how to recognize correct answers. We can even write programs, to check a proof in lean or whatever. And indeed, this is something where, people at the AI companies are trying right now to build AIs that are really going to be able to, do original mathematical research. And I think they are a lot closer than they were even a year ago.
Didn't you slip in a distinction there, though, between verifying things and generating things? So I agree that indeed it's easy to verify proofs.
Yes, but the point is, if you can verify a right answer, then you can train against it, right? Then you can, that obviously does not immediately imply that we can quickly find the right answer, not unless P is equal to NP. But it does mean that now we can, we have a target that we can train our AI models against. Okay. And what we're seeing again and again is that, AI, just, is able to achieve, human and superhuman performance on those kinds of domains faster than almost anyone expected.
But that's an extremely narrow set of problems that humans are able to accomplish. So litigating like bilateral trade agreements, figuring out how to raise your children, figuring out how to start a successful business, figuring out how to try to mitigate the Israel-Iran war. These are all examples of things that humans are able to do that do not have suitably objective rules and do not have many examples of play. And so in this thesis, it was just, to me, so revealing, because you both highlight all of the weaknesses of the current paradigm. It requires objective criteria. It requires many rounds of gameplay, many rounds of examples. And you are just ignoring all of the things that humans are able to do that AI can't. And so I guess my question is outside of these domains, like, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I would say for the remaining stuff, I don't know any reason why we are safe. Okay, so I would say like definitely, in the stuff that is verifiable, like, we are not safe. That has been our experience, and I don't know why we are safe in the remaining stuff. Right. I mean, you talked about negotiating trade agreements and things like that. These are all things where, to some extent we have the unfair advantage that, we are human. Right. And that we want to be dealing with other humans. Right. If we knew that there's a robot on the other end, then we say, no, I want to talk to a human instead, or something like that. Right. I mean, it was these kinds of concerns that led Turing, 75 years ago, to invent his imitation game, right? To try to, equalize the playing field a little bit. Okay. But I think, what we are already seeing is, this stuff is starting to permeate, the world. I mean, you have, for better or worse, possibly worse, millions of people who now have, AI friends, who have relationships with AIs, who actually are using it for, I think it is very predictable at this point that we will see, AI run businesses. Like, we will see people, release their LLM powered agent onto the internet and basically just say, find ways to make me money. And maybe there's some special sauce that humans have, that those agents will never be able to replicate. But what I'm trying to get across is that is not obvious. Okay, that is a profound question. And, we are going to learn something about it, amazingly within a decade, we will know more than we know now. Okay. But, the requisite experiment is going to be done. And I would I would strongly push back on anyone who says it's obvious that these things, will never be able to negotiate bilateral trade agreements. I would say, how do you know that?
Yeah, so let me answer that. So I think there's a couple different ways. One is just so we'll start from the very mundane, and then we'll go to the philosophical. So the mundane is just training data. We are running out of training data. The internet is essentially used up. There is a great paper that I've been talking a lot about that no one knows, where they just estimated the amount of available feed stock on the internet, and they estimated that it was about to end around 2027. And we're starting to see this plateau. So we're starting to see, like, Dennis Habibas, for example, DeepMind said, I think just on stage a couple months ago, that, like, obviously these things are not PhD level intelligence, people. Like, you just have to talk to it for 10 minutes and you realize you're not talking to a PhD level intelligence. You're starting to see, like, after GPT-5's lackluster release, that potentially we're starting to see the plateau.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, now we're talking about actual empirical things where, okay, we can have a discussion.
But then the philosophical. Yeah, I can give the philosophical.
Let's start with the empirical thing then, right? I mean, sure. It is true that at some point you run out of training data, and and for that reason, there is a limit to how low you can expect the loss of your base model to ever go. But, again, what we've seen over the last 3 years is that the base model is not the end of the story, right? You can get these massively, massively better, performance and practice by then, taking your pre-trained model and doing, first of all, doing RL on it, in domains where you can generate synthetic training data, right? You can do that. But in other domains, you can use test time compute, right? And that is how we've gotten to where we are now. I mean the I now do use GPT-5 thinking to help me with research. Okay, I give when I'm trying to prove a lemma, I ask it for ideas. It is actually useful to me. Right, and you could say, oh, it's just like, but I'm just using it for relatively simple things. Well, it's like, 5 years ago, it would have sounded science fictional that that I'm even using it for that, right? So we have to be careful about constantly moving our goalposts. Okay,
but we also have to be careful about using trends to extrapolate, right?
But the point I was going to make was that the progress that got us to this, from, let's say, GPT-4 or 4.0, the models of last year, was mostly not about the size of the base model, the amount of training data. It was about the reasoning. It was all like, stuff that was added, even after you've already run out of training data. Right. And so we don't actually know that, because you run out of training data, that therefore, the model hits a wall and can't get any better. Right. Or it might be that it does hit a wall, but that wall is when it's past human performance on just about everything. I would say that we simply don't know.
But so there's a Nature paper by Yaron Gall and his team that just shows what happens when you train GPT and on the data produced by GPT n-1, and you just get model collapse, because this is just like a informational perpetual motion machine. You can't get more out of these systems than you put into them. And so I'm just curious, like, just if we focus purely on the P equals NP problem, how do you think synthetic data would start to allow these systems to crack that difficulty? I would want to say that it's going to take a brilliant flash of insight from somebody using these tools somewhere, and we don't know when that insight's going to happen, and we can't predict it. And so I'm curious to hear your intuitions.
Yeah. Well, I would want to amplify your remark that you can't predict it, but even further than you would. Okay. I mean, look, I very clearly remember that, after Deep Blue, defeated Kasparov at chess, right? All like the people who said that wouldn't happen, immediately pivoted and said, okay, obviously you could beat, a grandmaster at chess. That's not interesting or impressive. That's just search. The real test is Go, right? Go, you obviously can never, play even competitively with the best humans without true flashes of insight. That there's no amount of training on examples that's ever going to give you that, right? Because Go is just this far deeper, far more intuitive game. Okay, and then we saw AlphaGo. Okay, we saw
but we haven't seen Alpha Poker, right?
Yeah. Well, so the level of
Poker's
play in
challenging.
poker is like really near the level of the best humans at this point. I mean, if you're staking your
no. So
claim
let me
they're never going to be superhuman at poker. I would bet against. I would say, how much are you offering to bet against that?
No, I'm staking my claim.
Person,
yeah.
In general, okay, but I would say we have never seen what happens when you sort of take absolutely staggering amounts of compute that you could just throw at trying to prove all the new theorems that you can in complexity theory, right? What we have seen, we have seen AlphaFold basically solve protein folding, right? We have but math is a domain where we can verify correct answers, right? Now is there something more than that? Like in some sense, I would like there to be, right? I would like the kind of thing that I do and that my friends do to be permanently safe from being outcompeted by LLMs. I'm just not confident that I know a reason why that's true. Right. I mean, Lee Sedol may have felt the same way about his Go intuitions, back in 2010, but he turned out to be wrong.
Yeah. So let me just answer the other challenge that you had posed and try to kind of reflect on some of the stuff he's just said. On this podcast, we talk about Popper quite a lot. We're very Popperian. And so one of the questions that Popper was really interested in is, what comes first, theory or observations? This obviously relates to the problem of induction, which I'm sure you know all about.
Yes.
And it's pretty intuitive and pretty clear that theory has to precede observations, or ideas have to precede observations, because we had the idea of the atom bomb and then we created the atom bomb. We had the idea of black holes and then we observed a black hole.
You don't just come into nature as a blank slate, right? You come, because you have particular prior ideas that you're trying to test to see, whether they hold up or not. I agree with that, as I agree with a lot of what Popper said.
And so just to continue on that line. And so then the other thing he says is you can't just shove observations into a mind or into a brain or into a bucket, which he calls the bucket theory of mind, and hope to get ideas coming out of it, because that just leads you smack into the problem of inductive logic and the problem of induction. But neural nets and gradient descent on training data is that. So neural nets and gradient descent on training data is just shoving in observation after observation, hoping that ideas will come. And so my response to you, when you say, what is the deep philosophical principle that differentiates humans from machines, is that we have the ideas first, and then we decide what to observe. And the way this kind of bounces off of what you said with regards to AlphaFold is just before you hopped on, I was referring to a paper from Mike Jordan's team where they studied.
By the way, Mike Jordan was my advisor for my first year of grad school at Berkeley. So,
I did not know that. Yeah,
I knew him. I knew him well back in the day, back before everyone was talking about this stuff.
Yeah, Dev, you spoke to him about like why he moved to France? Because
I haven't spoken to him for decades. I would like to.
He's moved to France because he thinks everyone in the Bay Area, with regards to the superintelligence crowd, are cray, just as a funny little anecdote. And as you know, he's kind of as influential as Jeff Hinton, but not nearly as well known to the public. But anyway, so one of the things that Mike Jordan's team studied was AlphaFold. And I guess AlphaFold, the data that they were trained on didn't include some very delicate quantum effect. You can find the acronym online. And so that leads to bias, because this one quantum effect can completely determine the output of these protein structures. But the thing that Jordan said in the quote, and I wrote it down because I want to bring it up here today, is that he says that scientists are not interested in the old data, which is what was used to build AlphaFold, but they're interested in brand new data that hasn't been explored yet. And to me, this is the Popperian insight. And this is the difference between humans and these tools, is that humans don't need a giant training set to determine what they find interesting and what they decide to collect data on. Mm-hmm. Whereas these machines do, and these machines are always going to be used to amplify human ingenuity, because humans are the ones that decide what the training data is in the first place. And so finally, the last thing I'll say is that when I made this point to Liron on the Doom debates for like months and months up until we came on, he was saying, give me this differentiating principle between humans and these machines. Give me this principle. So I said it to him. And then he's like, okay. And then he just moved on to the next question, and nothing changed whatsoever at all. And so I'm curious to throw it to you. So what do you think about this principle? And
I can directly answer you. First of all, I would say if there are quantum effects that AlphaFold is missing, then that is great news for those of us who work on quantum computing, right? It means that there is still something for a quantum computer to do in simulating protein folding that hasn't been just completely wiped out by the success of AlphaFold, right? So that's okay. So that's, I've been wondering about exactly that. To what extent is that true, right? Because of course, even when there are quantum effects, often, what we've seen empirically over the last few years is that ML models can just guess a good enough approximation to them, right? And but now I would love to find the cases where that's not true, because those are the cases where with a quantum computer we can win. Okay, but now this idea that there is some deep philosophical reason why we are able that we are able to know why these models can never have the true scientific insights, right? Because they've just come about from gradient descent and so forth. I would say that that's a confusion of levels of description. Okay, I would say that at some level of description, we came about via gradient descent. Okay, we came about via natural selection. Right, we evolved from the primordial
DNA are
soup,
discrete,
right? And yet
it's discrete optimization.
Gradient descent is even Popper and Deutsch would agree that we are creatures who are able to come up with new explanations, who are able to generate new knowledge. So we've seen an example of that working. Right. I would say, the gradient descent, that is done to train these models, is a different level of description from the level of, of what concepts is the model dealing with, at test time when you actually run it. Just like the natural selection that gave rise to our brains is a different level of description from, what are we thinking about as we generate new knowledge. Okay, so I would say, again, maybe there's a reason why, an LLM powered agent will never prove the Riemann hypothesis or whatever. But if so, you certainly haven't given that.
Well, it's a totally false analogy to evolution, because evolution doesn't have a trainer that presents the data, that plucks it from nature, as these systems do, and the humans are to these systems. And
obviously, in the case of evolution, the trainer is nature itself, right? We don't. Obviously, by definition, right? It's right in the name AI that these are the ones that we are creating artificially.
Yeah,
but I would say in the relevant sense, the relevant point is that you have this one level of description where, you're doing gradient descent to, produce this entity. And then you have this other level of description of, what does that entity know? What does it understand? Right. And, so, but by the way, when I go on podcasts and I talk to people who are equally certain, as you are, that on the opposite side, that AI will just clearly, replace humans. It will, unless we halt its development or, radically change what we're doing, it will take over the world. It will start converting everything into computronium. And I am pushing back on their certainty. I'm saying, how do you know that? Okay. But I feel like, the main thing that I can contribute right now is to push back on people's certainties.
So maybe let's well yeah for I almost want to take a step back and just lay out the landscape a little bit. Also, I'm aware that for the audience, we should also say that you spent 2 years at OpenAI doing AI safety stuff. You were recruited by Jan Leike and Ilya Sutskever, I think, to go work there from, I think, 2022 to 2024 or something. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you were in the belly of the beast, so to speak. And so I talked about your credentials with respect to quantum computing and stuff earlier, but I also wanted to note for people that you also have spent a significant amount of time actually talking or actually doing research.
I've been moonlighting in this, trying to figure out whether theoretical computer science can do something to help steer this in a better direction rather than a worse one.
Okay, so in terms of the landscape of concern, I can't quite tell where you land or what you're arguing for. And perhaps you're just playing devil's advocate for whatever position happens to be thrown your way. But as I see it, someone could, they could be various places on this landscape.
No, I mean, we haven't even been talking about like safety and alignment per se. I mean, because Vaden took this very strong philosophical position that, it is impossible that they generate new, insight or explanatory knowledge or whatever, then therefore.
To be clear. No, hold on. There's a bit of straw man happening. I just want to clarify. I'm not saying it's impossible.
All right. If you want to clarify that, then by all means.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it is in principle possible to arrange material such that we get new explanations coming. But you don't think that it can be done via something like via induction.
Okay, but then what do you? I would push back and say, what do you count as induction, right? Because there were all these people saying, well, LLMs can't do this or that, and then people just added the appropriate scaffolding, and then suddenly LLMs could do those things, and then people said, well, but you cheated. I wasn't talking about an LLM that can, access the internet, that can, do all this reasoning stuff before it answers you. It's like, well, okay, whatever is going to work, that is what these companies are going to do.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sorry, keep going. You're asking a question.
So, let's stay on that for the moment. So, Scott, is your bet that if you were to take the current paradigm, which includes both the pre-training, but then also RLHF and say training on chains of thought, if you were to now scale this up, and by scale it up, I mean, however you want to look at that, whether by data or computing power, what have you, would you be tempted to say that something like this paradigm could lead to a reasoner that's as general as a human? Because, one way of reading what you're saying is just to say, look, there could be another development like the transformer or like RLHF right around the corner that makes these things significantly more general. And that's quite a different position, right? Because some of the people we want to argue against, like just, let's call them doomers for the sake of this conversation, want to say, sometimes it's unclear what they want to say, but often they want to say the current paradigm as it exists right now, given appropriate scale, will, take over and destroy the world, and implying that it can be as fully general as a human.
Yeah, I would say that we don't know that you couldn't get to a fully general intelligence with zero new conceptual ideas. Right, with just scaling and adding various forms of scaffolding to the stuff that we already have, and that's an incredible statement. But if so, I don't know what that principle is. But I would also say that that matters less than you might think, because almost certainly there will be new ideas. I mean, just within the last decade, we saw the transformer, we saw RLHF, we saw chain of thought reasoning, right? So like every few years, there is some new paradigm that people use that gets around what were previously thought to be limits. And so it seems like a very safe prediction that, if we have this conversation again, a few years from now, yes, there will have been, additional such ideas.
So if we can just drill in a little bit on, so I agree that there could be a new idea in the future that means we get massive progress. Of course, that's possible. So let's just take that off the table temporarily because we agree on that. Of course, that's possible. But so on the side of just scaling up existing paradigms, Why did you add to your Aaronson thesis the various caveats that you need repeated gameplay, that you need, for example, suitably objective rules, and what does that say about the weaknesses of the current paradigm?
Okay, you're harping on this point, but I don't I really don't understand.
I just want to get the intention.
I just wanted to make a statement that I was the most confident, as possible is true. Right? The fact that I said that doesn't mean that something stronger isn't also true.
Sure.
It's just that I become less. It's just that I become less confident. That's it.
Sure. I thought we were maybe possibly having similar intuitions underneath those statements, but point taken.
Maybe I'll go a different direction. So people often want to look at trends and they want to say, like, what's the explanation that explains the trends we've seen of these models getting better and better? Mm-hmm. And the thing they often default to is that, there's the trend that these things are just getting smarter and smarter over time. And so 10 years down the road, we should expect to basically have superintelligence. So even if we're prepared to argue by trend, I'm not sure if that's the right way to look at it. So one way to look at it is to say, okay, first, when you just look at the pre-training, basically just doing next token prediction, if we look at what happened there, it plateaued, and then companies panicked and had to develop other methods that have come to be known as reasoning models.
I don't know that they've panicked. I mean, the amount of investment, that there is in AI, far from having tapered off, is like staggeringly, mind-bogglingly enormous right now, right? Yeah. Like a large fraction of all the capital that there is in civilization is now being allocated to build more data centers and more chips and train, so it is, like if someone said, people have given up on this paradigm, like the most wildly opposite thing is true right now.
Sorry, by this paradigm, I just meant the pre-training. I just meant
fine.
And then they came up with like various forms.
Yeah, sure, right. But people, are operating on the assumption that no, you're not just going to continue to just mindlessly scale one thing. You're going to keep trying, new ideas, new forms of scaffolding, new forms of post-training, and you're going to do whatever is most effective, right? And so that like you have to already price in. Right, you have to, assume that people are going to do that.
I guess my point is just that it's not so easy to see what the obvious extrapolation of the current trends is, right? Another way to read it is that these things, they keep sort of plateauing at human-like abilities. And they're much faster, of course, than humans because they're effectively thinking at light speed. But in terms of their actual capabilities, they're human-like or below, right? And then we keep doing things to like patch various things, but they keep plateauing at this level.
I don't know. They're in so many domains. They're already above the abilities of most or all humans, right? I mean, like I can interact with it about theoretical computer science, and it's like a beginning grad student, right? Maybe, it is. Sometimes confidently wrong, but, it is right enough that like I can actually use it as a useful collaborator, right? Now, like for what percentage of humans would that be true? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously it's not better than the best humans, but, is that the bar now? Right.
Right.
I mean, right. So yeah, I mean, but maybe one thing I could say that might be clarifying is like, in a sense, I would be much happier if Vaden turns out to be right. Okay, I would be, I would feel much more reassured about the way that things are going if I knew, some deep reason why it can only get so far and no further. But unfortunately, I don't know such a reason. Right. And that's why I think, I don't necessarily believe the Yudkowskian scenario that it, converts the Earth into nanobots. I don't know what it does, but I think something that is this general and this powerful. No, of course it isn't safe. Of course it is going to change civilization in ways that might be good, might be bad, but I think will be dramatic.
Yeah, I just want to comment there that I think even if everything I'm saying is true, that does not mean we'll necessarily be safe. I think that there's a lot of things to worry about with AI that is not the superintelligence conversations, autonomous weapons. You can go through the list. We both know them. And that's part of the reason I do get a little bit animated about the superintelligence conversation, because I think that there are so many other things to be worrying about, such as facial recognition technology in China and in authoritarian countries, just as one example.
Okay, but to me, it's just not an either or. I think it's just a completely false dichotomy that, there's like only this limited budget of worrying. And if people worry about A, then they're not going to worry about B. No, I think that this is all part of the same package. And certainly, even if you believe that eventually we will have fully autonomous agents that are, working against humanity or so, then certainly before then we will have, AI agents that bad humans are able to use to amplify their capacity to do bad. I mean, arguably we already have that. We are already seeing that, and we'll certainly be seeing more and more of that. And certainly I'm worried about that.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing I want to say, just before we maybe wind this subject down and pivot to something else, is just to leave with a falsifiable prediction that you can rub in my face in a couple of years. Okay. And one that we gave to Liran, which is, I don't think that these systems are ever going to be able to, for example, write consistent 1 hour funny stand-up specials. I think that humor and the more qualitative, there's some caveats there. So the caveat would be that you can't have a human being running a bunch of these and then finding the parts that they think are funny. Because if you have a human being doing the cherry picking, then that kind of contaminates the experiment, shall we say? Because I think
but how much of what a human comedy writer does, or are they going to just throw right in the trash? Right, they're doing lots of selection as well, right?
100%. So the prediction would just be that automatic system.
I agree with you. Humor is an excellent test case. I agree with you about the value of it. That's why I was very impressed when I saw Claude actually generate these stand-up comedy about its experience of being an LLM. And about all the ridiculously stupid questions that people ask it, and then it has to deal with. And I actually laughed when I was reading it. I have to admit, I laughed. Most LLM comedy has not been very good, but I have actually laughed at LLM output, and not because of how stupid it was, but because of how good it was. And actually, for me, it at least in a few cases, it's crossed that threshold. Yeah. It's true that I don't think it's at the point of doing a 1 hour stand-up special, but then again, neither are most humans, which you could say for so many of these benchmarks.
Yeah. So I guess that's a goalpost, which if crossed, I have stated on the record will totally change my mind and no going back. So I just return the question to you though. What would you see in a couple of years? What would you want to see in a couple of years, or 4 or 5 years, 6 years, that would make you less worried?
Oh, yeah. Well, so if okay, I would just say the obvious thing, right? If we see, AI having stalled, more or less where it is now, right? Maybe just, a little bit fancier, a little, more integrated into the economy, a little more useful. But, it is still struggling with, coming up with original ideas, right? It is still, it's only affected what we do. So let's say in mathematical research in only minor ways. If that's the case 5 or 6 years from now, then I would say I've then updated to be less worried.
Nice. Well, we'll do this again in 5, 6 years.
And I'm certainly not zero worried. I mean, we should notice the kind of timescales that we're talking about, right? The Zvi Malshowitz, had this, he loves to say these days, the AI pessimists are the people who think that, maybe it's going to surely take at least 10 or 20 years before, it can exceed human abilities at everything, or, it can automate my job, right? I mean, that, I'm old enough that I remember these discussions in the late 90s and the early 2000s when the question was, will this happen in hundreds of years? Will it happen in thousands of years? Right? Will this ever happen? Right? And now we're, if now we're having arguments about, 5 years or 6 years, right? I say, the fact that if these things haven't happened in 5 or 6 years, then certainly we can't relax. But yes, I would update in the direction of being less worried then.
Nice.
And I think
Awesome.
just about, even the most worried people, I think, would then update in that direction. Yeah.
I'd be curious to get your thoughts on universality. This relates to superintelligence, but also just computation more generally. So, of course, there's the notion of computational universality, which you'd be familiar with. And, for the audience, it's perhaps unintuitive, but, if you have very basic computer programs and you sort of keep scaling them up in power, you might think that computer programs can just get arbitrarily sort of more powerful, but that's not true in some fundamental way. You can there's this notion of computational universality where programs that are sufficiently complex past a certain point can all sort of fundamentally do the same.
Programming languages reach a ceiling. Right. And then once you've reached that ceiling, the programs themselves can get arbitrarily more complicated. But, But the language itself, you just need certain building blocks, and then you can express anything. And now look, this is one of the foundational insights in all of computer science. I like to say, for me, when I was, to go back to the beginning of this discussion, when I was 11 or 12 and I first, learned what programming was, right? It was like learning where babies come from, right? It was just this revelation. Why didn't anyone tell me this earlier? But then immediately I thought, okay, surely what I've learned is just some tiny little subset of what's possible, right? Like I've learned, Apple Basic, GW Basic, these were the ancient, programming languages that I saw then. And I said, surely the people who are making serious programs, are using some language that lets them express things that could never be expressed in principle in the languages that I know, right? So it was a further revelation to me when I learned this Church-Turing thesis. When I learned that, no, you just very, very quickly reach this ceiling of expressive power. Like once you have, you need a few things like, conditionals, the ability to sort of jump around to different instructions based on, what's written in memory. You need the ability to read from memory, write to memory, access different parts in memory, right? And then once you have that, then, you're basically set. Okay, so that's that was a profound discovery in the 1930s, and now I would say there is nothing there that is any barrier to AI, even AI on the current paradigm, right? Because one thing that we can say about neural nets, right, is that like. Okay, so certainly a neural net is able to, implement universal Boolean logic, right? It can, it can simulate and, or, and not gates, right? So, another form of universality would just say once you have and, or, and not gates, then you can express any Boolean function. Okay, and so certainly neural nets can do that. Now some people said, okay, but still they're limited. Because, any given neural net has just a fixed depth, and a fixed size, right? But, if they had thought about it, like they should have realized like these are not very strong arguments because, after all, our brains, also have, let's say 100 billion neurons, however many they have, our neocortex has 6 layers. Which is a remarkably small number of layers between, the input and the output. Okay. And yet somehow we make do with that. Right. And one way that we do it is that, we, first of all, to solve a hard problem, we are, using paper and pencil, we're using an external memory. Right. We are using our own neural nets recurrently. Right. We are generating a thought and then feeding that thought back in, sometimes literally speaking it, other times just thinking it. But, we are turning our neural net into a recurrent neural net. And at that point, I would say we ourselves basically, become, whatever else we also are. We become universal Turing machines. We become universal computers, as David Deutsch talks about in many of his writings. And I would say that large language models, when they are used recurrently, which is how they are in fact used, right? They generate a token. That token then gets fed back as the input for generating the next token, and so forth. Then they, in the same sense, also become universal Turing machines. And so, I would say, you could ask, a very interesting question, like, what is special about neural nets, right? Like, why that among, all possible ways of organizing a computation? And, from a super abstract point of view, you could say what's important about them mostly seems to be a combination of two things, right? Number one, that they are differentiable. So, right, they have these continuous parameters that you can do gradient descent on. And then number two, that they are computationally universal, right?
Right.
And so, you might hypothesize that once you have any model of computation that has both of those properties of, being Turing universal and being differentiable, then, it's just a matter of time, or it's just like a practical engineering question of, of what scale do you need to be at before you start getting this intelligent behavior. And that's, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I'm certainly very interested to know whether that's true.
So Deutsch has also introduced this other concept of universality, which he, I think, sometimes calls explanatory universality.
Yes.
And this is, basically the idea that there's nothing that humans couldn't explain. So humans have sort of reached, however this has been done in our cognitive architecture, we've reached this point where there's actually nothing that's fundamentally beyond our understanding. Yeah. So we don't actually have this sort of continuum of intelligence like ape, human, and then, sort of super intelligent AIs. Even though they might think faster than us, there's sort of nothing that's actually beyond our grasp. I'm wondering if you find that intuitively plausible, or like how you think about
that. So I don't. I in some sense I would like for that to be true. I mean, like my. I feel like, to be successful as a scientist, you always, you want to be optimistic, right? And you want to believe that, that you ultimately can explain anything, right? Or like if something is fundamentally unexplainable, then at least you can explain why it's unexplainable, right? Or at least like at some level you can really understand everything, right? Now, what Deutsch does is he sort of elevates that to a principle, right? And when you read the beginning of Infinity, like he just literally just puts his principles in boxes, and it's like, okay, I want to say to him, well, and of course, I've known him for 25 years, but I want to say, okay, the fact that you've put this in a box, does that mean that you actually know that this is true, right?
Yeah.
And
good point.
So I mean, like opposed to his position would be the Mysterian position, right? Which would say like there are some mysteries, and maybe the mystery of consciousness, has been put forward as an example here, right? Of how does where does our subjective experience come from, or maybe why does the universe exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? That maybe, these things could be as far beyond our explanatory powers as like, general relativity is beyond a dog's explanatory powers. Right. And, so, I don't know, maybe I would limit myself to saying that, unlike with computational universality, like here, I don't see like any principle that's sort of integrated with the rest of our scientific knowledge that would resolve this question one way or the other, right? Like I hope that humans are universal explainers. That would be nice, but I don't know a deep principle why we have to.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I was hoping you could buoy my optimism. I also find it quite intuitive, right? But of course you would, because you can't conceive of things that are beyond your ability to explain them. So of course it's going to be.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you're right. You could say, the very fact that this, explanation, would be so far beyond us that it could never fit in our heads, even in principle. Well, then in what sense is it even an explanation that like we are licensed to care about?
Right.
So, final question, since we're on the Deutsch subject, would absolutely love your thoughts on the many worlds interpretation. And I'll just give like 2 seconds of background why, which is, both Ben and I are extremely influenced by Deutsch, but I don't understand quantum mechanics enough to be able to look at the other alternative interpretations out there. So just give me a 5-minute burst on what you think is the most plausible or least plausible interpretation of quantum mechanics and where you are with many worlds.
Yes. So I am a fan of many worlds in the sense that like I think that Everett made an enormous contribution to our understanding of quantum mechanics by saying, well, why couldn't it just be unitary evolution all the way down, right? Why couldn't the fundamental ontological reality of the world just be this wave function, be this vector of amplitudes, and he showed how you could within that framework you could understand our experience of a classical world, right? That we're just in this this one branch. Each branch gets experienced with the appropriate probability. And this is in some sense, this if that were true, then this is what it would feel like. I think that grappling with the many worlds interpretation is just a really crucial part of anyone learning quantum mechanics itself, right? Which is why I teach about it in my undergrad class. I'll actually be teaching about it next week. Right. But, what I'll be doing, we have very strong norms against, imposing our religious values on our students. Right. And so, hopefully the students will not be able to figure out what I believe. Right. We will be interesting. So we'll be learning comparative religion. Okay. We'll be learning about, what the Copenhagen people believe, what the many worlders believe, what the Bohemians believe. And then, what the people who reject all of them and say that, there has to be some empirically new physics here, what they believe. But I think of these as sort of the 4 main positions that are out there right now. Of course, the main issue is that, if we talk about either, Copenhagen or many worlds or Bohemian mechanics, right, they don't obviously make any different empirical predictions, right? And so, the usual way that we advance in science by, sort of identifying a crucial test that we can do that differentiates these theories, right? It doesn't work here. Right. And so then, the whole case that people, have to make is really based on, a simplicity based on, but now people have different intuitions about what simplicity means here. Right. And about what did you expect a scientific theory to do for you in the first place? Right. There are some people who are instrumentalists, right? Who just say, so many people say, the point of a scientific theory is to predict our observations. Quantum mechanics does that. Therefore, there's nothing more that we need to say. Okay. Now, I would say that was bound to not satisfy everyone forever, right? Because, people do want to know, okay, but what is the underlying reality of the world, right? And they don't want to, make this distinction between classical systems and quantum systems because, we ourselves are made of atoms. Right, we ourselves should be part of the universe that quantum mechanics is describing. Okay, and so then when you take that seriously, then you find that like within quantum mechanics as it currently exists, there is not a principle that tells you that sort of limits the scope of superposition. Right, that says you can only have superpositions that are this big and no bigger than that. Right. And and beyond that, you just get a single classical outcome. No, there is no, if there is such a principle, then that is going to be new physics. That's going to go beyond quantum mechanics as we currently know it. And, and there were some people who think, that that has to be the case, or at least we should look for it. We should look for evidence of new physics. Roger Penrose, famously believes that when we try to integrate quantum mechanics with gravity, that is the most likely place where we're going to discover this new physics that is going to limit the scope of superposition. Okay, and look, I am open to that possibility, but I would say the more conservative option is to just take quantum mechanics, as literally true, as true at all scales, and then try to make sense of it, right? And when you do that, then I would say that you are led to this idea of a quantum state of the whole universe, right? And that state is going to, continue branching forever, right?
That's
right. You don't have to put that in as a hypothesis, right? You just get that out from the equations, right? That, there is going to be this conscious, this constant branching. Okay. But even then, there's still a further question, which is, well, how does any of that connect to our experience? Right. Because after, our experience is, the only thing that leads us to have to formulate a scientific theory in the first place.
Just quick, is it accurate to say that the many worlds interpretation is kind of just the most literal reading of the Schrodinger's equation? Is that what I caught you said?
There's a sense in which that is true. Okay, but okay, or at least let me say it this way: there is a part of many worlds, that is just that is just the literal reading of the equations. Right there, and that is the part that says, you can understand measurement as just the measuring apparatus and the environment, and ultimately you are all becoming entangled with the system that's being measured. Right. So, you're evolving from this unentangled state to this entangled state on this larger system. Right. And that is what produces the effect of decoherence, of loss of, quantum coherence in the system that's being measured. I think all of that is just pretty well accepted, uncontroversial physics at this point. And, and of course, that is, that's all physics that's going to be tested in a very dramatic way when we try to build the first scalable quantum computers. Right. And we're going to see, how much can we scale up, the principle of superposition? Can we scale it up to, the level of millions of interacting components? Okay. But then there's also a more metaphysical component to many worlds. Right. And I would say that the more metaphysical component is the part where I think in practice, many, working scientists get off the train. Or, stop having any firm opinion, right? And the metaphysical part is when you say, and furthermore, when we have this wave function of the whole universe, all the branches of the wave function correspond to different conscious experiences that people have, right? The other branches are just as real as this branch, right? They're all being subjectively experienced by, different doppelgangers of ourselves, right? And I would say, the way I would put it is to know whether that's true or false, I would have to understand consciousness itself a lot better than I feel that I do understand it. So if we take the Bohmians, for example, right, they agree with the many worlders about, this universal wave function, right? They posit the same wave function and, in fact, they make exactly the same predictions as the many worlders do. Okay. But then they posit this additional rule. Okay. For the evolution of one world, which they would say is the real one. Right. Which is just sort of buffeted around by the wave function, in a way that gives you the same predictions. Right. I mean, now I'm not a Bohmian, but, the reason I'm not is mostly just because of the seeming arbitrariness of their rule. Right. Like I would say, why this rule? As opposed to 100 other rules that I could write down that would equally give rise to the same predictions, right? But do I know that they're wrong? No, of course I don't. If for all I know, maybe consciousness does work that way, right? That there is sort of one branch that is lit up with the fire of experience, and all the other branches are just kind of ghost towns. They're there in the equations, but no one is home to experience them, right? I don't know. I don't know what's the truth about that. And just like with the AI discussion, I would mostly just try to undermine the confidence of the people who claim that they know the answers to such things.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, we're running up against the hour, so we can't continue to get you in trouble with the Bohemians, and but also, you also don't have to keep listening to Vaden berate you about AI.
That's all right. Look,
this is fun. This is great.
I've gotten in trouble with lots and lots of people for things that I've said online. So, I've had to develop a thicker skin, which doesn't come naturally to me. But
you need that around Vaden. I've learned that the hard way.
But yeah, this was a very enjoyable conversation. So
thank you so much for coming on, Scott. This was awesome.
Yeah, great.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.